Alright, welcome to the channel. In this video I'm going to cover the gangs of Atlantic Canada. Thank you for tuning in. It's been a while since I posted a video, but I'm back to my regular schedule and I actually have a whole bunch of videos coming up, and so I hope you'll stick around for those. So in this one I'm going to cover the different criminal organizations in the Atlantic region of Canada, and this of course refers to the 4 provinces on Canada's east coast: New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and Newfoundland and Labrador. This is one of the least populated areas of the country. The current population of the entire Atlantic region of Canada is about 2.8 million, and this is relatively low. The population of British Columbia alone has about 5.6 million. Of course, the largest city in Atlantic Canada is Halifax, which currently has a metro population of about 500,000 people. I'm going to cover the major criminal organizations in this region, everything from outlaw motorcycle clubs to family organizations and street gangs. This will be a relatively quick summary of these groups. You can find a deep dive on many of these organizations on YouTube if you're interested. This will just be a general overview of some of the major organizations in Atlantic Canada. And of course, all information in this video is based on publicly available information. And so without further ado, here are some of the gangs of Atlantic Canada. I did my best to put together a reasonable summary in a relatively short amount of time. And I'm going to start with the outlaw motorcycle clubs in this area. Of course, not everyone in these clubs is involved in illegal activity, but as a whole, these groups are generally considered to be criminal organizations for good reason. First off, you have the Bacchus Motorcycle Club. This group was founded in New Brunswick in 1972, and they're currently the 3rd largest outlaw motorcycle club in Canada, and one of the most well-known clubs on the East Coast. They've generally had good relationships with other outlaw motorcycle clubs in Canada, and for the most part, they've avoided major biker conflicts. By 2003, the Hells Angels had basically pulled out of Halifax, and after this, the Bacchus Club was able to expand their presence in Nova Scotia. However, the Bacchus Club is not really at odds with the Hells Angels, and they've maintained relatively close ties with this larger club. Bacchus also has strong ties to other motorcycle clubs in Canada. In 2014, they would patch over their closest ally, the original Red Devils Motorcycle Club, to create their first expansion into Ontario. The original Red Devils were founded in Hamilton in 1948. They are the oldest outlaw motorcycle club in Canada, and I'll cover them in more detail in my Gangs of Hamilton video down the road. After originating in New Brunswick in the 1970s, Bacchus eventually expanded beyond that province, and they now have chapters in Ontario, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and Newfoundland, and they are one of the major outlaw motorcycle clubs in Atlantic Canada. In 2018, 3 Bacchus members were convicted of extortion and intimidation after they threatened a man who attempted to start a chapter of a non-criminal motorcycle club in Nova Scotia. All 3 members of Bacchus received jail time in this case, and this also led to Bacchus being designated a criminal organization by a judge in Nova Scotia, the first time that designation had officially been used in that province. And so Bacchus currently has chapters in every province in Atlantic Canada, and they are one of the top outlaw motorcycle clubs in that region. They also maintain close ties to smaller support clubs such as the Paradise Riders and the Vagabonds Motorcycle Club. Now, even if you don't know a lot about motorcycle clubs, you've likely heard of the Hells Angels. This club was formed in California in the 1940s, and they are now the largest outlaw motorcycle club in the world, with an international influence and chapters in many different countries. They established themselves in Canada in 1977 when they patched over the Popeye Moto Club in Montreal. Over time, they expanded across the country from coast to coast, and they have become the dominant motorcycle club in Canada. The first Hells Angels chapter in Atlantic Canada was formed in 1984 when the 13th Tribe patched over to the Angels. The 13th Tribe had been the dominant motorcycle club in Nova Scotia for many years, and they were led by a man named David Carroll, otherwise known as the Wolf. David Carroll would be the first president of the Halifax chapter, and he would become a prominent figure in the Eastern Canadian biker scene. Obviously, the port of Halifax is a major center for drug smuggling, and the Halifax chapter of the Hells Angels helped the club solidify their control of Eastern Canadian drug distribution. During their heyday in the province, numerous employees at the Halifax port had ties to the Angels. David Carroll would move to Montreal in the early 90s to join that chapter, but he remained very influential in the Halifax chapter, and he controlled a very profitable drug pipeline from Halifax to Montreal. David Carroll also became the patron of prospect Danny Kane, who would go on to become one of the most prominent police informers in Canadian biker history. Police informer Danny Kane reported to his handlers that, quote, Carroll was very disappointed by the leadership exercised by the Hells Angels in Halifax, end quote. And prominent Canadian crime journalists Julian Scher and William Marsden wrote that the Halifax chapter was, quote, not an impressive crew, end quote. One of the founding members of the Halifax chapter, Randy Mercereau, broke away in 1998 to form his own gang, claiming that he just wasn't making enough money with the club. However, despite their organizational issues, the Port of Halifax remained an important hub of drug smuggling. Between 1991 and 2003, police would seize over $2.5 billion worth of drugs from the port. In 2001, police launched Operation Springtime, which at the time was the largest one-day police operation of its kind in Canadian history, and during this operation an arrest warrant was issued for David Carroll. At the time, Carroll was in Mexico, and it's believed that he eventually fled to Brazil. He has been seen several times in Canada over the years, but David Carroll, who founded the Halifax Hells Angels chapter, is still officially missing and wanted by police. By 2003, following massive police operations and arrests against the club, the Halifax Hells Angels membership dropped below the minimum requirement of 6 members, and the Halifax charter was officially revoked. Currently, the Hells Angels have no official presence in Halifax, but they have close ties to their many support clubs, as well as the prominent Bacchus Motorcycle Club. The Angels have also had a Nomads chapter in New Brunswick since 2016, as well as a chapter in Prince Edward Island since 2019. And of course, the Hells Angels largely operate by controlling smaller motorcycle clubs in this area. One example of this is the Gatekeepers. This is a support club for the Hells Angels that was formed in Musquodoboit Harbour, Nova Scotia in 2013, and they were sponsored by the London, Ontario chapter of the Hells Angels. By 2015, they had expanded into several chapters in Nova Scotia and Ontario. There was some tension between the Gatekeepers and the Bacchus Club, although there's no indication of a major conflict between the two groups. In 2017, the Gatekeepers clubhouse in Pictou County was raided by police, and soon after this the group started closing several of their clubhouses in this area, which was mostly related to the financial pressures of maintaining these properties. Around this time, the Red Devils Motorcycle Club began to expand into this area. The Red Devils are a major international support club of the Hells Angels, and during their expansion into Atlantic Canada, they largely recruited from the Gatekeepers. This Red Devils expansion effectively superseded the Gatekeepers' original influence in this area. Currently, all Gatekeepers chapters in Nova Scotia are frozen, but they still maintain multiple chapters in Ontario, and they continue to have a strong influence in Eastern Canada. The Darksiders are another prominent outlaw motorcycle club based in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. They are another support club of the Hells Angels, and when the Red Devils Club expanded into Atlantic Canada, they also recruited many members of the Darksiders. This club continues to have a strong presence in Nova Scotia, and they're especially prominent in the areas of Dartmouth and Bridgewater. The Vikings Motorcycle Club was formed in St. John's, Newfoundland, and operated for years as a support club for the Hells Angels. However, by 2018, the club had been completely dismantled by police after a large law enforcement operation called Project Bombard that started back in 2014. In 2018, the RCMP stated that they had officially dismantled the club, leaving Newfoundland as the only province without a strong Hells Angels presence. There are many other smaller outlaw motorcycle clubs in this area that currently support the Hells Angels, such as the Highlanders, Cat Sass, the Niners, and Sedition. The outlaw biker scene in Atlantic Canada is dominated by the Hells Angels and their support clubs, as well as the Bacchus Club, who maintain relatively close ties with the Angels. However, in recent years, the Hells Angels' main rivals, the Outlaws, have been expanding their presence in that region. In 2021, the Outlaws opened a new prospective chapter in the Halifax area, leading to law enforcement concerns about possible future conflict. The Outlaws' official support club is the Black Pistons. This club was founded in Germany in 2002, and they have also been developing a presence in Atlantic Canada, with chapters in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, and Fredericton, New Brunswick. In 2016, the Black Pistons chapter in Fredericton was involved in a violent and well-publicized conflict with Hells Angels from Quebec. Atlantic Canada really hasn't had major outlaw biker conflicts compared to other areas of the country, but these clubs remain major players in the underworld of this area. When you're discussing organized crime in Atlantic Canada, you have to mention the Melvin and Marriott families. The Melvin Marriott feud is one of Nova Scotia's most notorious criminal conflicts. This was a violent and decades-long rivalry centered in Spryfield, which is a working-class community in the Halifax area. Both families have been deeply involved in the local drug trade, organized crime, and street-level violence for decades. First off, you have the Melvins. Jimmy Melvin Sr. rose to prominence in the 1980s as a major local figure in drug trafficking, and his family developed a reputation as violent people not to be crossed lightly. And then you also have the Marriott family. Terry Marriott Sr. and his brothers were involved in organized crime around the same time, and they had links to the Hells Angels and their local support clubs. Initially, these families worked together occasionally, and they would share their connections in the drug trade. But this alliance was very unstable. By the early 2000s, as the older generation aged or went to prison, their sons Jimmy Melvin Jr. and Terry Marriott Jr. took over. Several small disputes over money, territory, and perceived disrespect escalated. For example, Jimmy Melvin Jr. reportedly felt disrespected by Terry Marriott Jr. as a younger man, and later accused his father of being a rat. Others claim that Terry Marriott Jr. mocked Jimmy Jr.'s reputation and questioned his toughness. These slights would amplify over time, and tensions boiled over, leading to violence. In June of 2006, Wayne Marriott, who was a cousin of the Marriott family, was shot and killed in the driveway of his home. This murder is widely viewed as the spark that ignited the modern phase of this feud, and retaliation followed almost immediately. Several homes associated with the Melvin family were firebombed, shots were also fired at houses, and cars were torched. In December of 2008, Jimmy Melvin Jr. was shot twice in the upper body in Dartmouth, but survived the attack. Local police began tracking this feud more closely, aware that it was threatening bystanders and destabilizing parts of the city. In February of 2009, Terry Marriott Jr. was shot and killed while asleep in a friend's house in Harrietsfield, and this was widely believed to be a retaliation for the attack on Jimmy Melvin Jr., and police would step up their surveillance and make several arrests of associates on both sides. This feud would then quiet down a bit. Jimmy Melvin Jr. would be charged with first-degree murder for the death of Terry Marriott Jr. However, he maintained his innocence, and this case dragged on for years. In June of 2017, after a long and heavily publicized trial, Jimmy Melvin Jr. was acquitted of Terry Marriott Jr.'s murder. However, he would be ultimately convicted of attempted murder and conspiracy to commit murder in relation to the 2008 shooting that injured him. In 2021, a judge in Nova Scotia declared Jimmy Melvin Jr. a dangerous offender, meaning that he can be kept in prison indefinitely. This decision effectively ended Jimmy Melvin Jr.'s role in the Halifax criminal world and symbolized the end of this feud's main era. And to this day, the Melvin Marriott feud remains the most prominent organized crime conflict in Atlantic Canada, and it left a deep imprint on Nova Scotia's criminal history. Now I'm going to briefly cover North Preston's finest, also known as NPF or the North Preston Gang. This is essentially a gang of pimps based in North Preston, which is a satellite community of Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. North Preston is an interesting place. It's mostly populated by Black Nova Scotians, and it actually has the highest concentration of African Canadian residents of any community in Canada. The settlement of North Preston had its roots in multiple waves of Black migration and settlement. In the late 1700s, Black loyalists came to this area following the American Revolutionary War. Around the same time, a wave of Jamaican Maroons who were deported from Jamaica also settled in this area. There was a further wave around 1813, which involved Black refugees from the War of 1812 arriving from the southern U.S. Benjamin Perrin, who was a UBC faculty member involved with human trafficking research and activism, wrote extensively about the North Preston's finest gang in his 2010 book Invisible Chains, calling North Preston a place of Shakespearean irony because of the town's conversion from a sanctuary for former Black slaves into the headquarters of a major gang that deals in modern-day slavery, as well as drug and weapons trafficking. The NPF gang allegedly started in the mid to late 1980s. Their primary activity is human trafficking and sexual exploitation of young women, many of them underage. They've also been involved in many other criminal activities, including drug trafficking and weapons offenses. Their activity also extends far beyond Nova Scotia into many parts of central and western Canada. NPF members use physical and psychological manipulation in controlling girls and women that they sexually exploit. Gang members typically groom the girls first and approach them as boyfriends. Young women and girls are often groomed in Nova Scotia and then moved to other provinces to perform stripping and prostitution under control of NPF-affiliated pimps, largely in southern Ontario. However, their influence has also been reported much further west. Officers in several major Western Canadian cities reported members of NPF staking out territorial claims and activity, manipulating girls and young women into being sexually trafficked. Previously operating sex traffickers in Western Canada began to fear the NPF so much that they began to pay the gang for the right to traffic. Calgary Police Sergeant Mark Schwartz claimed that Calgary's non-NPF pimps pay NPF a fee for every girl they prostitute in order to avoid violent conflict with this gang. This gang is described more as a loosely connected network of individuals with ties to North Preston, rather than a gang with a traditionally rigid command structure. There are many examples of their activity in Canada. There was a well-publicized case from 2007 where a 19-year-old woman from Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, was abducted and sexually assaulted by Tyson Kane, who police identified as being associated with NPF. Kane would eventually be arrested and charged with human trafficking and gun possession, among many other charges. From October to November of 2007, the Peel Regional Police conducted vice operations targeting strip clubs in the Greater Toronto Area and found that many female performers had maritime addresses, and it was alleged that the NPF was moving these women between Peel and Niagara. In 2009, NPF associate Marlo Williams coerced a woman all the way in Edmonton to fly to Ontario, where he forced her into stripping, took all of her income, and viciously assaulted her when she tried to leave. This eventually culminated in the first human trafficking charge by York Regional Police, and Marlo Williams was sentenced to 3 years. And so overall, the NPF are a loose organization based in Nova Scotia, but operating across Canada, where they are particularly prevalent in southern Ontario. As I mentioned, besides human trafficking, the gang is also involved in drug and weapons trafficking, as well as murders, robberies, and assaults. And then besides these larger organizations that I've covered, there have also been several smaller street gangs active across Atlantic Canada. I found a Canadian Department of Justice article from 2006 that identified 5 street gangs active in Halifax: the North End Dartmouth Gang, Murda Squad, Woodside Gang, G-Lock, as well as Gaston Road. I didn't come across a ton of information about these groups, but there was a case from 2005 where 19-year-old Jonathan Reeder was found dead from blunt force trauma after leaving a nightclub in downtown Halifax. Police, as well as Reeder's parents, believe that the Murda Squad gang was responsible for his death. I also found some mention of the G-Lock gang, who apparently operated in the Uniacke Square area, which is a public housing area of north central Halifax. I came across a 2008 Government of Canada article that identified North End Darkside and Young Mob as youth street gangs that were active in the Halifax area. During the Melvin Marriott feud, there was another gang called Spryfield MOB, which stands for Money Over Bitches, that was apparently controlled by BJ Marriott. I also found another article from 2006, and it said that 7 youth gangs were active in New Brunswick, 4 in the Moncton area, as well as 3 more in the northern portion of the province. There was another article from 2007, and it said that police in New Brunswick had arrested several youth that identified themselves as Bloods and Crips, and they also stated that street gangs were on the rise in the Maritimes. And so overall, even though Atlantic Canada has a relatively low population, it's definitely had its fair share of gang activity, and the Port of Halifax in particular remains very important in drug smuggling. The Bacchus Motorcycle Club, as well as the Hells Angels and their support clubs, dominate the outlaw biker scene in this area, although there's been an increased presence of the Outlaws and their support clubs. The Melvin Marriott feud is the closest thing to a mafia war in the Maritimes, and it remains probably the most well-known gang conflict in this area. North Preston's Finest is one of the most prominent human trafficking organizations in Canada. They're based in Nova Scotia, but they operate across the country, particularly in southern Ontario. And then of course you have various smaller street gangs that operate throughout this region as well. I definitely didn't do a deep dive on these groups. This was just a general overview of this topic, but it should give you a reasonable summary of the major criminal organizations in Atlantic Canada. And that's pretty much going to wrap this one up. I hope you found this one interesting and informative. If you haven't already, then please consider subscribing to my channel. I upload a variety of Canadian content, and now that I'm back to my regular schedule, I typically upload something new about once a week. And if you want to support my channel further, you can buy me a coffee, and there's a link to that below. I appreciate you tuning into my channel, and I have many more videos coming up over the next couple months. Thank you for watching, I hope you have a great day, and I look forward to seeing you next time on the Strange North channel.